Okay, it's 7 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming this evening. This is the neighborhood meeting for High Pointe DeMun. So we've done a few of these already. We've already had a meeting with Hillcrest. We just had a meeting with Tuscany in this room just a little while ago. And so we had a community meeting at the end of June, and I'm sure some of you were there. It looks like there are some familiar faces here this evening. And so we talked about at that meeting going down to the neighborhood level next. And so that's what we're doing. We're having individual neighborhood meetings to really address or at least gather feedback on individual concerns for the neighborhoods, because it's different for everyone depending on where you are in proximity to this property. So today we're really concentrating on the south side of the Concordia property and the adjacent neighborhoods there, where Hillcrest was a totally different conversation on the north side, a different set of concerns. So we'll start off by kind of recapping what we talked about in the larger community meeting. And if you weren't there, the presentation slides, along with a narrative over the presentation slides, those can all be found at engageclayton.com. If you haven't gone to that particular website, I encourage you to do so. There's an area at the bottom where you can actually sign up for notifications. So anytime information's added there, you'll get a notification that something is there that you can review. There's also an area where you can leave comments on that site, and we do monitor that. We do take that feedback into consideration. So we're trying to be as transparent as possible and provide as many different opportunities as possible for the community to weigh in as we go through this process. So please go to the website if you haven't had a chance to do so at this point in time, but it's a lot of great information there. It's really the clearinghouse for everything. So I'm going to start by recapping a few slides that were presented at the community meeting and talk first about zoning generally, just what is it, because it's somewhat of an abstract concept if you don't deal with it on a regular basis. But breaking it down, zoning really seeks to do three things or regulate three things. The first is the use of land or buildings. So when we're talking about use, we're talking about exactly that. Is it retail? Is it hotel? Is it a residential type use? When we talk about the intensity of that land use, we're talking about the potential impacts it may have. Is there the potential for noise pollution, light pollution? How much parking or traffic is it going to generate? So how intense is it? If it's an agricultural use, it's not going to be that intense. There's not going to be that much activity. If it's a large apartment high rise, there's going to be a lot of intensity on that site. And that's something that you want to address. And then finally, we look at the bulk of the use. And when we talk about bulk, we're talking about physical characteristics of the building itself. So how far is that building located from the property lines? That's also known as a setback. How tall is the building? Those are examples of bulk regulations. So when we put together zoning requirements, we always focus on use. So how's the land going to be utilized? How intense is that use? And then finally, what do the physical structures look like on the property? So that's what zoning seeks to do. The current zoning for the area that we'll be talking about this evening, you can see here is all in yellow. Yellow is R2, which is single family residential. So it's a little bit unique here in Clayton that we regulate institutional uses, the South 40 campus, Fontbonne and Concordia Seminary, using single family zoning. And a lot of times what you'll see in communities that have institutional type uses are specific zoning districts set up to regulate them. Because what happens is anytime we get an application from one of those institutions, they have to be issued what's called a conditional use permit. And so what that is, it's a very specific application that they make. So they'll say, we want to build a residence hall. And then so they'll submit the plans for the residence hall, and we'll go through a public process to try to mitigate, again, any potential nuisances that may occur there. So when we talk about a conditional use and what that is we're saying that the use is allowed, but the city, in approving that permit, can put conditions on that approval to mitigate any problems that it might generate. So some examples, just pulling this straight from the zoning code, would be additional traffic volume, parking beyond their capacity, is it spilling over into the neighborhoods, noise, pollutants, those types of characteristics. So those are things we seek to mitigate through a conditional use permit. The difficulty with that is every one of those is a one-off application. So if you're dealing with a large area, you're just doing it, piecemeal, one application at a time, and each one of those is not necessarily a negotiation, but sometimes it feels like that when you go through the process to figure out what those conditions are going to be. When Washington University approached the city with the concept that we'll be talking about this evening, we kind of viewed that as an opportunity to have a conversation about, hey, if we've got phased development in this area over a long period of time, perhaps we should explore doing something a little bit different from a regulatory standpoint and go ahead and set all of the regulations and all those mitigating type factors. Let's go ahead and establish that up front so that as it develops over time, there's predictability there for everyone involved. And so the way we do that in a lot of areas throughout the city already is by utilizing overlay districts. And so an overlay district, when you put that over a piece of property or overlay it on the property, that those regulations supersede that single family designation that's already there. So the overlay district prevails as we go through this process. What it does, again, is it leads to cohesive development. So rather than just taking one-off applications and then stacking them up, and if you look in our files, that's what's happened over time. So the South 40, for instance, if somebody wants to know how a particular what a particular requirement is for the university on the site, we have to go through a stack of files to try to find the approval for that specific building and all the conditions associated with it. This is a little bit different, where in the zoning code, you could open it up and see all of the regulations that would be applied to anything that happens within that area. So it's much more cohesive. And in the end, it's much more predictable for everybody. And that's important for our residents too, because when you regulate through the conditional use permits, what happens is you as a property owner will get a letter in the mail that says there's a public hearing for this particular application. And there's a lot of uncertainty about how that will end up looking, what that use will end up being like. In a lot of times, folks show up and they feel like they have to play defense immediately to keep it from causing some sort of issue or being a detriment to their neighborhood. When you have an overlay district, everybody knows the rules right up front. So there's no need to go and play defense so long as you build that overlay properly. And so that's why we're engaging the community now, is let's figure out what the concerns might be and see if we can write an overlay district to mitigate all of those concerns right up front. The parameters that we've discussed with Washington University as we've had these conversations, most importantly, is we want to preserve neighborhood character and the quality of life for the residents that are adjacent to the property. That's our foremost concern here. And then we just know through public hearings over time, as we've had many of those here in this room, when residents come in and they want to speak on an application, we primarily hear three concerns. Residents don't want to see it, they don't want to hear it, and they don't want traffic or parking in their neighborhoods. So we can regulate whether or not you can see it. We can do that through building heights. We can do that by establishing transition zones or buffers. If there's going to be exterior lighting on the site, what are those lighting requirements? How are those lights have to be directed? Do they have to be shielded? What's the maximum brightness for those lights? Those are all things that we can regulate. Same thing for whether or not you can hear it. So, decibel levels on any kind of public address or speakers, whatever might be there. Where those parking lots or garages are located, because of course cars make noise and you want to keep that away from the houses. And then finally, don't want traffic or parking in neighborhoods, which is always the biggest concern, and one we've heard quite a bit about in our meetings already on this particular project, is making sure you have proper access points for the development and then ample parking on the site. So again, it's not spilling into those adjacent neighborhoods. Just to give you an idea of the types of things that you might find within an overlay district, typically right up front, you'll have a purpose statement. You'll say why you're doing this. You'll talk about the location of the district. So what are the boundaries? The district character description. So what do we want that area to look and feel like? We'll have a criteria for review. So everyone understands the process when applications come in. This is the process they'll go through in order to get their approval. We'll have definitions and calculations. So we'll be very clear about how we measure height and what building height actually is. So there's always a section related to that. And that's just an example there, but site plan and architectural review requirements. So a checklist of items that a developer would need to provide to the city in order for the project to be considered. Tree and landscape regulations. So that's where the buffers kind of come into play. How many trees do you have to plant? What's the tree preservation on that particular site going to look like? Off-street parking and loading requirements. So how many parking spaces do they need to provide, or do they need a parking study in order to determine what that is? And then when you get into development standards, coverage is a big one. So impervious surface is something that you hear quite a bit in these meetings. And so how much of the actual site can the buildings and the parking lots and the drive aisles and those types of things take up? The building density. So how many buildings are we actually going to allow on that site? Or if you're talking about residential, a lot of times that's where density comes in. How many dwelling units within the piece of property can they provide? Height requirements, we can talk about layout and orientation, which way do buildings face, which way do lighting standards face, those types of things. Lighting standards, so again, brightness, shielding, the direction that they're pointed. Setbacks, so how far are the buildings from the property lines, transition zones, which are the buffers between a neighborhood and the site being developed. Grading and drainage, which are big concerns, especially on the south side of the site. So I know when we had our meeting with Tuscany just a little while ago, that's something they brought up right away. Accessory buildings, so if you have a shed or something that's next to a field, what does that shed have to look like? What are the rules for that? And then we get into the uses. So if you remember, we talked about use, intensity, and bulk. On the use side, what exactly can they have there? So as you draw out that overlay, if you think about the South 40, and I know that's not adjacent to you, what types of university uses are acceptable within the South 40 area? So is it residence halls, dining halls, bookstore? We'll actually list and specify each of those uses that's permitted in that area. So this is just to give you a feeling about the types of things that we would typically regulate in an overlay district. And so the two areas we'll talk about today, and I'll turn it over to Concordia to talk about a project on their property that kind of unlocks all of this, is the South 40 Campus Overlay District, and then a Big Bend Overlay District. And so the South 40 Overlay District, you can see, is bound by Forsyth on the north, Wydown on the south, and then Big Bend Boulevard on the west. And then further down, here's the Big Bend Overlay District, and you can see that that's bound by Big Bend on the west. It kind of cuts through the middle of the Concordia property, and it's immediately north of the buildings here on San Benito and Tuscany Park. And so when Concordia talks to you in just a minute, you can see that where their project's actually at is outside of these overlay areas. So I talked about how overlays are important if you have long-term phased development, so that you have that cohesion there. At this point in time, Concordia doesn't have long-term plans to do a bunch of phased development. They have one very specific project. So in their particular case, they're still proposing to utilize that conditional use process in order to get an approval. So when we talk about overlay districts, we're just talking about the South 40 and this area here along Big Bend. So I will turn it over to Michael Lewis with Concordia Seminary, and he'll give an overview of their project. Then Washington University will talk about theirs, and then we'll open up the dialogue.
Thank you, David. I'm Mike Lewis. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Concordia Seminary. This is the Concordia Seminary boundaries today. I've outlined this in green. It's about 72 acres. And again, this is the way it sits today. We have Big Bend on the west, and we go all the way over to DeMun on the east. We have two issues that we would really like to address at Concordia Seminary right now. The first one is housing, both for married students and single students. And the second one is to try to create a sense of community. And we're going to try to solve both those problems at the same time. The housing that is on Big Bend right now that you can see on the west side of that rectangle is our married student housing. It was constructed in the late 1990s. And it is, for a number of reasons, excuse me, about done with its useful life. It's in poor condition. It was poorly placed. It was poorly planned, poorly built. And even if we were to dump a significant amount of money into that property, we would still have a number of those problems to deal with. And what we've chosen to do instead is to move those buildings east, significantly east toward the chapel, which is in the center of that rectangle. Our single students are still living in 1920s dormitories. And we intend to replace that housing with a 75 unit apartment building, and we're going to move them west. So we're going to end up moving the married students east, the single students west, and they will end up near each other, hopefully creating community. And one of the ways we're going to do that is to surround our chapel with housing and bring them closer to the faculty who live just north of the chapel, and to the buildings in the center of our campus, which is where all of our offices and classrooms are. This is a two-dimensional aerial view of our building project. As David said, this is, essentially a complete thought for us. We're not phasing anything. We don't have a lot more to do other than what we're looking at today. But there's a building directly west of the chapel, one northwest of the chapel and one southwest of the chapel that are all identical. They are three 24-unit apartment buildings, and this is for family housing. Directly north of the chapel, there are 9 townhomes, again for married students, family housing. And then directly south of the chapel is a 75-unit apartment building that would be for single students. So in addition to building those, right there, yeah, that's the 75-unit single student building. These are the 3 apartment buildings for the married students.
This is existing.
This is what's planned, and I'll get to a next slide and you'll be able to see the before and after. And these are the townhomes that I was talking about. We intend to, right now there's a drive, a road right here and a lot of parking. We intend to eliminate that and make all of the circulation of traffic to the exterior of this housing. And in addition, build a 2-story parking deck right here. So what we would be getting rid of is about 75 units of married student housing today, plus a few of these units, if you've ever noticed them. These are 1950s ranch homes in pretty poor condition. We would eliminate some of those as well, but replace all of that with about 81 units of married student housing. So when you add the 1950s ranch homes to the married student housing that we would be taking down, it's about a 1-for-1 swap. No, these are 3 stories. We wouldn't be replacing those. We would just be tearing those down. Yes. Parking spaces are about the same. We add about 20, maybe 25 more parking spaces. So the next slide actually.
The question is, how tall are the proposed buildings? Sorry, we need to use a microphone in order for the people watching on Zoom to hear.
Those are 3-story buildings. Yeah, and I'll get to the parking garage in just a minute here. So you can see on the left now what is the existing, and this is the road that I was talking about. This is the existing condition today with the chapel here. And there's also a building here that needs to be demolished in order to complete all this construction. And ultimately, like I said, the traffic is then on the exterior of this housing project. And there's a parking deck here. The P that I have put down here is the parking deck. And the next slide is a picture taken from this vantage point right here. So what you're looking at here is this 2-story parking deck. And I know that it sounds intrusive, but there's such an incredible change in grade on this end of our campus that the car up here that you see pulling in is actually pulling in on grade on the top floor of this parking deck. And then this one over here is pulling in the lower part. So there are no ramps inside. We're just taking advantage of the ground. You can see the height of those apartment buildings in the distance.
How does this change one?
It wouldn't change anything on DeMun. No. Yeah, I'll get to that in a minute here. If you look at the next slide, the DeMun part stays exactly the same. This is all a park-like setting today, and nothing has changed over here. Nothing has really changed in the core of our campus other than a significant reclaiming of about 25,000 square feet of these buildings here.
The question is about the condition of asphalt on DeMun currently and whether or not that would be replaced.
The asphalt on our campus or on, yeah. Well, I would certainly hope to, but that's not a part of this project. On our Circle Drive is what you're talking about. In here?
closer to where that statue of Martin Luther is.
Right. Terrible. So, and you'll see this image a little bit later on, but what we've done is superimposed on the western part of our campus. You can see the existing housing underneath, but this is intended to be the athletic complex for Washington University. And they'll talk about that more later, but you can see that today, this line actually goes through probably the middle of the tennis courts where our housing would end and the new athletic complex would begin.
Well, Washington University, we'll get to their plans in just a moment. And then we will have a long question and comment period. It's just difficult for everyone at home watching online to hear without microphones. So no, that's okay. That's okay. There will be a lot of questions tonight and we'll work through everything here.
So I'm Mary Campbell and I run real estate for Washington University. And the plan here is Concordia approached us when they were going to move their housing over to the east of their campus and asked if we would utilize the western part of the site. And this was a great opportunity for us to relocate some select fields and facilities to that site to then free up and rationalize some use on the other parts of our campus. So that's what we're talking about here. And the tool to accomplish this would be these two overlay districts. And we're working with two architecture and design firms. We're working with the BCJ, Tom Kirk, on the Concordia overlay. And he's going to talk to you a little bit about the details of that. And then we're working with Trivers and Ross Welsh on the South 40, and he's going to quickly walk you through that. And then I know you have tons of questions, so we will get right to it.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I'm Tom Kirk with Bowen Swinski Jackson Architects. Good evening. So these are similar to the maps that David showed us, except we're zoomed out a little bit so we can see the full campus, the Danforth main campus of Washington University. And then below that is what's known as the South 40. And Ross will talk about that in a minute because that becomes one of these overlay districts in this. On the South 40 is where WashU's undergraduate student housing is. And there's also some fields there. Mary alluded to this. There's two baseball and a softball field and sort of an intramural. So this, move that when Concordia approached Washington University and started these conversations, it's sort of these moves on a chessboard. You know, if they can move their housing over, then WashU can start to think about the South 40 and how to sort of talking about rationalize that South 40 so it's not this mashup of uses, and therefore look at overlay district that we're calling the Big Bend overlay district, which is the parcel adjacent to. Before we jump into those and look at them in a little more detail, just wanted to back up. And, when you start to think about what this means in the future, and it is a long-term plan, is how do you, David talked about this, right? How do you maintain the characteristics of the neighborhood? WashU is interested in the same things, building community. So we want to think about access. The South 40 is adjacent to the main campus. This Big Bend district is not. This is all about sort of creating a vibrant, healthy place that, again, is part of the community, part of the neighborhood, is integrated. So how can we get pedestrians down through there, past Fontbonne, bicycles, people walking to reach this district, to activate it, right? So that's what you're seeing here in this diagram is sort of how that might happen just at a high level, but also the green buffers you're seeing, and we have a zoom up of this, we can talk, but you all live there and you know this, for the most part, both of these parcels are heavily landscaped. There's some exceptions down near San Bonita. It's a little more open because of what's happening at the southern edge of right now, but for the most part, along Big Bend or adjacent to Tuscany Park or around Forsyth, wide down, there's a healthy landscape there. So we want to maintain those what they call buffers and transition zones to the largest extent possible, and that's what sort of that green boundary means. So looking at the Big Bend district, this is the existing condition. Mike talked about what's happening there. It's the existing housing. There also are the tennis courts at the bottom of the page. There's an athletics building down there now. The sort of barrel shaped building. Sorry, let me point at those things. There's the athletics building, the tennis courts, there's an existing field up here. And then all of the housing. Then, you know, the whole point of the overlay district, and this is just sort of the first step, as David mentioned, having these conversations to think about what the zoning provisions will be for this, showing the setbacks that exist currently right now. You can see those numbers. And beginning of overlaying, literally, that district with some of these provisions. Obviously have a long way to go with all two. These are the setbacks. So right now setbacks mean where you can build, which is different from buffers. But right now the current existing setbacks are 60 feet to Big Bend and then 15 on the San Benito. Looking ahead, you can see the zones that are kind of amoeba shaped on the edges. You know, someone mentioned this, you know, there's an existing landscape around much of this particular parcel. We would look to keep as much of that as possible and do the developments interior to that. I mentioned where there are places where the buffer might be not as robust. We'd obviously look to provide that buffer. That would be part of the overlay. I'll let Ross take it from here to talk about the South 40 overlay. Oh. Sure. So the question is what is happening? Let me see if I can hit the back button. Give me 1 second. There we go. So there is no detailed plan. This is just the beginning. Again, you know, this whole thing is predicated on Concordia moving their housing over. If that can happen, WashU might be able to do something at South 40, which would allow the baseball and certainly the baseball and the softball field to move down here. And then some supporting facilities for those. That would be sort of a baseline. And, you know, WashU also has what's heard it was the South Campus. It's the old Christian Brothers Academy. CBC parcel that has club sports. So the two fields are varsity sports that I mentioned, baseball and softball. These other, I think that's a good way of thinking of it. They'd be very similar to what exists now. Right. Well, it's just baseball and softball. Right. So, and then the club facilities, there is a soccer field down there. If you've been down to that parcel down there, and there's a CBC. Exactly. Thank you. So that's, if that can happen, those would be the playing pieces. Right. But we haven't laid it all out. We don't know exactly where. And playing piece. These would be the program elements, we would call them. They would be the what would be built there.
And
yeah, they're athletic fields, exactly.
And to answer your question before, so the core activities on the Danforth campus, like Francis Field, Francis Field isn't going anywhere. So if varsity soccer plays on Francis Field, football plays on Francis Field, they're not going anywhere. The big field house on the Danforth campus isn't going anywhere. Summers, rec center, and all those ancillary uses are not going anywhere. Our wish list today is the softball field and the baseball field that are on right off Forsyth on the South 40. And then the club sports that are down at that old CBC site, giving them a better home up on Concordia. That's what we have on our wish list. And then we need to study the site a lot further to see if there's anything else we can accommodate. What else would be there?
What about the CBC building?
So right now, you and I cannot have a conversation about that building because I've got all the club sports. Our varsity students practice down at that site. We've got 34,000 square feet of athletic uses inside the building in the gym. I have nowhere to put them. There is no alternative site. If we are able to relocate those uses to Concordia and decant that building then we are able to have a conversation with you and with the city about options for that site. We do use the building, not all of it. Some of it is in not usable shape at all. But the western portion, where the new addition is, there's a cafeteria. We actually have rowing machines in the cafeteria. There's a small theater, the Clayton Community Theater uses, and then a gym. And multiple sports use the gym, multiple club sports. And that's pretty much what gets utilized inside.
There's a question about what athletic facilities entail on the site, on the proposed Concordia athletic site.
We don't know yet. But know that the overlay, as you saw on the prior slide, it's going to dictate, height and scale. So we can't, we're not going to put some monstrous facility. And frankly, again, given that we're a relatively small school, the big facilities are on the Danforth campus and already built. Would we have some indoor facility? Likely. But the big use on Concordia are going to be the outdoor fields.
All right, well, look at the South Forty in a similar way to how Tom stepped through the Big Bend district. This is a aerial of the existing, which has street frontages on Forsyth, Big Bend, and Wydown, and then shared property lines to the east. You can see in the upper left, those are the softball fields and baseball fields that are in conversation. That relocating those off of the South 40, which right now there's an inconsistent use with the rest of the residential nature of the South 40. This diagram is just meant to show what buildings currently establish the distance from the street. And try to put some numbers to what that experience feels like. We took out the animation of driving down Big Bend and turning onto Forsyth, but this is a quick snapshot to invoke that feeling of the experience from the street. What doesn't show here and is in the video is as you turn that corner and how much closer to the street the fields actually get to Forsyth and how that experience is different than these conditions shown along Big Bend and Wydown. Oh, I'm sorry. The mouse was on stop share. That was all existing. Is this the right one, David? To the left?
The question was, how do the sizes compare between the South 40 overlay area and the Big Bend overlay area?
So we'll bring this slide up just to show a size comparison. The acreage, I don't know if we know the acreage of Big Bend district.
28 acres.
So a little more than half of the South 40 area.
Concordia Fields, ingress and egress to the Concordia Fields. Is that all going to be off of Big Bend?
Go back one more to that diagram, back again. Question was about, I think we heard it, you had a mic. You can see there's a blue arrow. Blue is vehicle. Right now, just as a placeholder, we're showing one vehicle entrance off of Big Bend. It's across from Oak Knoll, just as a placeholder for making a logical intersection, but that we have a long way to go. Just had an initial conversation with the county about this, just to let them know that we're even thinking about this. But there will need to be a vehicle entrance. And yeah, it's Pedestrian and bicycle are the other two colors.
Thank you.
Just one more slide on the South 40, and then we can be a little more deliberate about questions. This shows what could be facilitated in a proposed condition with the overlay district. And the real point of this is that the experience from the street is intended to remain the same, if not improved, as the development could take place. The buffers on the three streets are the same dimensions. The boxes drawn out are really no suggestion of the design, but the diagram of the pink dots and dash is intended to talk about how circulation could be facilitated if that northwestern corner is opened to a more cohesive development with South 40. We talk about kind of shifting the center of gravity back toward the Danforth campus and the neighborhoods where students are living, and facilitating better traffic across the South 40 down to the southwestern corner to engage that path that's proposed down to the Big Bend district. David has a couple points about timeline and next steps.
Great, thank you, Ross. So next steps, you can see on here, we are still at the first step, which is gathering that community inputs. We had the larger community meeting over at the high school at the end of June. And now we're at the neighborhood level, hearing those more specific concerns and fielding questions from neighborhoods. So the other thing I would encourage you all to utilize again is that engageclayton.com website where all of this information is held. Anytime there's a meeting, we're going to post those meeting dates and that information there. So please sign up for those notifications. And if you want to leave a comment there, feel free to do so, or you can send that along to us. So that's what we're doing right now, is just gathering as much input as we can, because what we'll do following these neighborhood level meetings is sit down with Washington University and Concordia and start to put together and build that set of regulations for the overlay districts. Once those have been developed, and then we'll have this conversation again, and we'll have some more specificity. So I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions today, and we'll bring you the particulars once we establish the overlay, and that's kind of that next step. So initial feedback tonight and this week from the neighborhoods, then we'll put together the overlays. Then we'll have another conversation about it. But when it comes time for formal consideration, the process starts really by establishing those overlay district regulations. So what we call that is a text amendment, because we have to add those regulations to the city's ordinances, add it to our municipal code. In order to do that, we have to have a public hearing at the Plan Commission, and our Plan Commission will then make a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen. The Board of Aldermen will hold another public hearing. So those are two more opportunities to weigh in on it. And then the board would actually give it formal consideration, approve or deny that particular change. If those overlay districts are approved, the next step would then be to actually place those regulations on this specific property. So you establish the regulations first. The second part is actually applying it to land somewhere in the city. So what we would do is we would move to change the city's zoning map to lay the overlay districts at Big Bend and South 40 as they're written in the code. Same exact process for that. So we would have a public hearing at the Plan Commission. They would make a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen, who would then hold a public hearing and then ultimately decide whether or not to overlay the zoning in the area. This process is going to take months to play out here. And we're still in that early stage, and we're here to gather feedback. And that's the point of the meeting this evening. So we'll go ahead and open it up for questions and comments. There's a microphone up here at the podium if folks want to come up and speak. If you are online watching the meeting and you'd like to comment on anything, there is a raise hand feature on Zoom. So you'll see a button down at the bottom. Looks like Vanessa has already found it. We'll give you the opportunity to speak here in just a moment. But once you hit the raise hand button, we will recognize that. When we call on you, we'll give you permission to speak. Just unmute your mic and ask your question or give your comment. So we'll go ahead and open it up now, and let's allow Vanessa to have the first question or comment.
Thank you. Thanks for all this information. It's very helpful. I had a few questions. First, about the timeline that you think this will all be completed, and Also, if you could speak to the construction noise and how that will be contained. And lastly, the lighting and noise that will come from the new athletic facility. There's already lighting and noise from the CBC fields. And so I just want to make sure, considerate about that.
And Vanessa, I'll turn it over to Washington University's representatives to answer your questions. Could you give us your address really quickly for our record here? Just so we know where you're.
We
at.
actually live on San Benito Avenue,
Okay, great.
6525. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Let me address the Concordia Seminary part first. We would be ready to start construction actually fairly soon, but there are a number of contingencies that we have to get through, including this process to start. So we have to actually move all of our housing before Washington University could do anything else. So that's the first big block that has to be moved. And in regard to construction noise and construction activity, I think one of the great things about our project is that it's so interior to the campus that we're not going to be disturbing the edges.
So we are several years off before even thinking about construction. And we don't have firm plans because we're several years off. As Mike said, we can't start anything until Concordia has completed their housing and actually moved all the students into it. And construction noise is something we're all going to have to work together on. We're going to have to work with Mike to figure out how to access the site in a way that doesn't harm the neighborhoods. It's something that we deal with on other projects, and we're cognizant of it, and we know it's important to you.
Okay, thank you.
Vanessa, someone in the room asked if they could get a response on the lighting question that you'd asked.
So the overlay district is going to regulate both noise and lights. And it will regulate on the lights, both the brightness of the lights and the time that they can be on. So, that's an expectation. And with noise, again, don't know where it's going to land now, but that it will be set at a level that we won't be allowed to exceed. And that will be in the overlay, and that's something that you'll see as soon as the draft comes out.
Thank you. We'll field the question in the room now.
Yeah, hi. Two quick questions. Does Concordia owns this property? And are you renting it to Washington U, or what's the financial partnership in this?
It's a very complicated structure that we worked on for a very long time with Concordia. The property is going to be deeded to Washington University for a term of 80 years. After 80 years, title reverts back to Concordia. It's very unique.
So it will be Washington U's property for 80 years.
It will be titled to us for 80 years, and then it reverts to
Okay.
Concordia.
And then I've mentioned this to friends, and they say, well, what about Fontbonne? Did they have any part in this, or are they going to be able to use the fields, or?
So Mike and I have spent a lot of time talking to Fontbonne. We have kept them up to date on our conversations, and we've met with them quite a bit. They are actually excited. This is a tool that they can't use today, but in the future, they're very interested in watching how this goes and learning. We have had a very collaborative relationship since they sit right in between, the South 40 and these athletic fields. We're going to work with them very closely. on bike and pedestrian paths of travel and all sorts of issues, security, all sorts of issues. So they're at the table and it's just a start. It's just a start of a dialogue with them.
In the new overlay, the Big Bend, did I see housing possibly proposed in that area too? There was a,
No, the use would be exclusively the athletic fields and facilities that we've been discussing.
And if everyone could, if you'd like to, if you could give us your name and your address. That way, if we have follow-up information as well to get over to you, we know how to find you. That would be great for our records. Thank you. All right, next question. We've got one in the room here, and then we'll go to Linda online following this question.
I'll do her first. I live on 6531 San Benito. I guess in the back of our buildings, we face the seminary right now. Will there be any additional buffers, either light or sound, with this new proposal? Because right now there's a street behind us that's people driving in at night. There's headlights and stuff. Will there be more buffers or along that street? Or if there's people still driving into that garage, what kind of sight and sound buffers will there be between the back of San Benito and the seminary?
I would ask Angie Esslinger, who's in the back from the Lawrence Group. She's our architect to comment on that.
Hello.
Hi.
The existing vegetation that's currently there, the goal is to keep that intact as it is. As we develop the landscaping around that particular parking garage, which is the far corner, we would do what we could to implement new landscaping as well. There are regulations already in place for when development happens, you have to meet certain criteria, and we would have to meet all of those. I don't know what those are right now, but we would be maintaining, if not improving, what's already in place.
And could you say there are two more questions about traffic patterns? Will there be more traffic on the back? Do you expect more traffic on the back of the housing of San Benito? People going into the parking garages, or what's the expected traffic pattern? Is it to increase or stay the same?
So I can't speak to the existing traffic that goes down that road, but that would be the main route around the entire new housing complex, would go all the way around the perimeter of the new area. So there is potential for increase along that south road if it didn't already have a lot of traffic.
And what would decrease the sound of that traffic? Just the vegetation, or are you going to put increased vegetation, you said, or is that?
Ideally, we would increase vegetation. We would definitely maintain what's there.
'Cause right now it's just a series of pine trees which don't block much.
Okay. I honestly don't have an answer for how to address the sound at this moment, but we can consider that when we're designing that space.
And one more question, will there be more traffic on Seminary Place, all the way through to Clayton Road?
Seminary Place should have the same amount of traffic that it already does because we're not on the Concordia portion of the property. We're not increasing housing units. We're just moving them closer. Currently, the married students that live on the western portion have to enter through the campus at some point, either along DeMun or through Seminary Place.
So will they be keeping those gates open more that block? A lot of times the gates are open and closed periodically, but those gates may be always open behind Seminary Place, behind San Benito on Founder's Way.
Address that, Mike.
Are you talking about the gates at Concordia Lane or on?
It's behind San Benito, there's that lane, I guess it's called Founder's Way, and there's usually a gate that's locked. And are you gonna keep that open more now?
No, those are security gates. They're closed at night for security so that there's one way in and one way out of the seminary.
Will that be closed then still?
No, we wouldn't change when the gates are open or closed.
Okay,
Now, if you're talking about the gate that's down by Concordia Lane by the field house,
it's basically parallel to Seminary. It's parallel on Seminary Place, and it prevents people going behind the houses on San Benito.
yes.
If you close that, you would prevent people from
You're
going
you're
into,
correct. Now,
it
now
would prevent
that would
people
actually
from
be
going
open.
into the new garage
Yeah, where there's absolutely, that would be open.
all the time then, or?
Yeah, that would be probably the one way into the seminary at
Okay.
night after hours. We're just trying to, for security reasons, presently, we're trying to close down all of the entrances except one, which is the seminary place entrance. And today you could actually get into the seminary place entrance and go into the seminary and find your way around.
But you have to go
And-
around. You can't go behind San Benita.
Right, in the future, that road won't exist. The one that continues to go north. It'll go north a little bit, but it will dead end.
Okay.
All right, let's go to Linda, who's had her hand up for a while. Linda, you should be allowed to speak now if you can unmute your mic.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. I have a concern about what's going to happen to CBC once you move your facilities from CBC into the Big Bend area. Property owned that I own along there, we've had it for over 80 years and plan on having it for another 80 years. So we're going to be here no matter what happens with Washington U and Concordia. So I am more concerned about what you're going to do with CBC's property.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. It's right now, we're not doing anything with it other than its existing uses, have the theater and our athletic uses. And I can promise you that if this project moves forward, if we're able to move the athletic uses to Concordia, the Concordia site, and at that point, we could then consider options for the CBC site. We would start with a dialogue with the community and the city.
Okay, do you have any, I mean, I know you're putting plans out 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I know how universities work. So do you have some idea what you want to do with that property?
We do not. It does not meet any of our immediate needs other than how it's being utilized right now.
And are you going to transfer everything to the Big Bend site?
Everything that's in there now that's an athletic use
Yes,
is going to transfer to the Concordia site. Yes.
it is. Okay.
Mm.
Thank you.
There is a small gymnasium in the building. Like I said, we have rowing machines in the cafeteria. There's a gym there now that were a multitude of activities, badminton. There's some club basketball. Yeah, potentially there may be some sort of building that would essentially replace that facility. It wouldn't be something like we have on the Danforth campus that is a major complex. But yes, there's a potential to have an indoor facility that would accommodate some of these club sports on the site.
All right, next we'll go to Wesley online. Wesley, if you unmute your mic, you should be able to talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi. Yeah, so my name is Wesley. I'm at 909 Concordia Lane. My family's been in this neighborhood since the 80s. My father did a semester at Concordia Seminary, so we're pretty closely tied to this whole area. I was born in Clayton. My aunt and my cousins immigrated from China to St. Louis, and the first place they stayed was on Concordia Lane. So we've got a lot of history here. And so, yeah, I just want to say thank you to Concordia Seminary for being so amazing. And, you know, I walk my dog there every single day. WashU has been great to my father because he got his PhD there. So I want to comment on the very beginning of the video that you guys put together. And that was the statement of nothing will be rezoned. And that immediately sort of brought a lot of things to my concern. So, I'm thinking of, the millions of gallons of water that'll be utilized by the new athletic facility. And, it's zoned currently to be a field, a field. So, how does that, the lack of rezoning, how does that pay for the wear and tear of, millions of gallons of water being used for showers and all these extra cars driving through? 5 years ago, well, about 5 years ago, the sewer lines were redone. And I guess they relined it or they sealed the inside. And ever since they did that, at the corner of Big Bend and Clayton Road, there's that part that just, it's weeping constantly, throughout the year. So like in the winters, it freezes over. They tried, I don't know, they tried repatching it. The water constantly bubbles up, and it the asphalt is just deteriorates immediately. And also concerning the fact that as Clayton resident, we're gonna now have to pay for our trash services because it's not going to be included in the municipality taxes, or I don't know how that all works, but so my main concern is there's going to be a lot more activity, but no funding change. How's that? I mean, how can that be? And I apologize if you guys talked about this already, because I came into this a little bit late because I had to work. But yeah, maybe you guys can clarify that for me.
So you had quite a few questions mixed in there. So first of all, just on the zoning portion of it, the current zoning for that property is single family residential, as we pointed out on that first slide. So while the current usage of the site is the residential use on the west side that's there right now, there is a field on the site. From a zoning standpoint, not much is changing other than the overlay laying over the top. The residential district as it's established right now, with the submittal of conditional use permits, conditional use permit applications, things can be built on that property. When you talk about infrastructure and changes there, Washington University and Concordia, as they go through the zoning process and then through the process to obtain building permits, they're going to have to demonstrate to Missouri American Water that their facilities can handle it. They're going to have to demonstrate to MSD that their development can handle all of the runoff requirements that they have, that their sewer capacity for everything that they want to put in. So all of those boxes are going to have to be checked along the way as they go through this process. And those things aren't necessarily tied to zoning. So again, zoning will deal with how's the property used, what is the intensity of that use, and what is the bulk or the size of those buildings, or the physical form that they actually take. But as far as the infrastructure is concerned, those are all things that their engineers will have to put together and submit to those various entities for approval as they go along. I think that addresses everything. Was there something I didn't address that you would like us to?
I'm thinking long term. It's like
yes,
yeah,
I mean, as far as a burden on city services, I'm not sure that a whole lot changes here. We're just the proposal as it is really moves things around. So there's no additional housing on the Concordia site. The athletic fields already exist on the South 40 site. Those would just be coming down to the Concordia property. Washington University provides their own police services. So as far as a burden on the city, I'm not sure that a whole lot actually changes through this proposal. So from an infrastructure standpoint, that'll have to be taken up with those other entities. But for the city of Clayton, I don't envision our service levels being impacted by what's proposed here.
I mean, what kind of athletic facility are we talking about? Are we talking about, like, what are we talking about? Like 3 baseball fields, 5 indoor basketball courts? What is the square footage estimate of the footprint of this facility, and also about how many people is it estimated to service, or entertain, or or whatnot?
Yeah, those are all really good questions. And I think if we go back to the diagrams, the existing plans, South 40 has a baseball field, a varsity baseball field and a varsity softball field. Those are the two fields.
Mhm.
As Mary mentioned, there's no varsity football, varsity soccer. That's not coming down here. Those are on the main Danforth campus. They stay. That's Francis Field. And those facilities, they all stay. So those two fields. And then if CBC shuffle could work, that would be a club field that's used for all kinds of sports, soccer, lacrosse, frisbee, whatever they can play on there, they play on there. It's artificial turf. You can play on it all through the year. That would move. And then Mary mentioned those indoor facilities, the gym and some locker rooms. That would be the facility. So I think you said, is it 5 basketball courts? That's not what's down at CBC now. So that's not envisioned up here at the moment. How many people? Again, I mean, just to provide some context, if the CBC site moves, that's obviously additional population. If it doesn't move, that's a different population. So it's hard to say how many people with much certitude. But we do know right now that, for instance, at a varsity baseball game, the most probably ever seen in terms of people, butts and seats in the stands is probably about 200, 250 people. It's not to say they won't, become the hottest thing in town and, get a couple more fans there. But anyway, just to give you a sense of the numbers of just one sport that might be there. But other than that, I mean, it kind of depends on like who all comes and what that means.
Yeah, because it's pretty nebulous in terms of what, I mean, obviously you say, it's going to be, the fields are going to be moved down, but like, if you guys put a Shea Fitz arena there, it's like, okay, that's not, well,
But not even
So-
close, not even close. Yeah, and it's hard. I understand this is really hard. We're here with no site plan. Wanting to hear your feedback and you're wanting details. It's sort of a catch-22. If we had all the details, if we'd gone to all this effort and planned it and then said, here it is, then we wouldn't have gotten your feedback. So I understand it's frustrating, but there's so many moving pieces. I mean, we felt it was better to actually get feedback and then work with the city to put it together. So you bear with us a bit on this.
All right, thank you, Wesley. We do have a question in the room.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Kirschner. I live at 6465 San Benita. And so we back up to the parking lot at the Concordia Library. The only thing I'd like to comment is I hope that in this process, lighting can be, obviously it's necessary, but I'm hoping that maybe state-of-the-art lighting, whatever that means, that is pointed down instead of pointing out. And like I said, I don't know what that means exactly, but I would love to see that improved. Thank you.
Yes, sir, please. Oh, sir, if you could use a microphone, please.
Or you can tell me and I'll tell them.
Mike, Craig Westerhold, same household. My question is for Mike, based on where we live. In a perfect world, once you start the housing project construction day one, what's your estimate of how long it will take?
15 to 18 months.
Okay, because I think that is seminary traffic coming in to build.
It could be. There's a couple of options. Concordia Lane is also an option.
Okay, but 18 months is your thought
We think
process.
that's the outside.
Okay, thank you. And you've been a very good neighbor to us so far, and we've been there about 10 years.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll go back to Vanessa.
Hi, my name is Travis Schaller. I live at 6525. Vanessa's my wife. She spoke earlier. And I'm actually a certified general appraiser. And I just have a few questions. as far as just to reach back to that one gentleman about the barrier between the rear of the condos and homes that back up to the lane just south of the tennis courts. You know, really, I think the architect from Lawrence, I really wish that she would pay attention to that because the lighting and the sound noise from just the uptick in traffic and lighting, I think really needs to be addressed because it's going to be multiplied probably tenfold. And I think that's a serious concern. When we originally bought this property, the rear view of the maintenance building was actually cited as a negative on the value of the home. And so, you know, all of the traffic and noise and lighting is a concern for me as far as the value of our condo. And I think that needs to be addressed, whether it's some sort of barrier, you know, with planters or natural larger trees or whatever would work best. But I think, you know, tall, natural type of barrier would work best. Thank you.
Is this on? Yes. Okay, this is Angie. To address your comment, I appreciate all your thoughts. This would go through the CUP process, so we will have to address all of those items, and we've noted them already, and we will make an effort to make it better than it is today. So thank you for the comments. And the CUP process does have in place opportunities for your input there and then when the actual design is further developed as well. So our piece of this property is a little bit different than Washington University's piece, but we do appreciate the same issues and concerns that have been voiced for that other portion of the property as well.
Thank you very much for your time and everything. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we'll go to Gene Cody online.
I'm Jean Cody and I own about 4 properties in the neighborhood. I've been in the area for about 50 years. My most near property is 6633 San Benito, which backs up to the old field house or whatever it is. And my major concern is that we're talking about a long-range plan and changing in zoning to develop overlay districts when Washington University, who plays such a big role in this, owns CBC, is looking at these fields, is looking at the South 40, and has no plans for them, which is very unsettling to me as a neighbor, because if you have someone who doesn't have a presented plan, it's really hard for us collectively to look at long-term planning. And the impact on Seminary Lane and Concordia Lane will be very big, as will the impact of having traffic flow, which seems most likely to come down Concordia Lane and Seminary Lane to Founders Lane across the back, where I'm about to make a big investment at 6633. And a lot of folks have turned the duplexes into single family homes. And so I feel like changing a zoning when you really don't know, though Washington University entered into an 80-year lease, which is pretty long term. But we don't hear any of that. It's unsettling. I just see all of it as kind of the entrance across from Oak Knoll into the ravine seems like impossible. And I'm saddened that the buildings that were built 30 years ago, which appear to be quite lovely, and will have to be hauled out of there, probably down either Seminary or Concordia Lane. We've not talked about any of that. It's very simple. Can anybody
Sorry,
hear
we're
me?
just- Yes, we can. We're just talking amongst ourselves about how to
Okay,
respond to.
I'm sorry, I'm just
You're-
sort of sitting here and never,
Yeah, as
never
far-
land.
As far as the traffic for the demolition, I mean, Concordia can maybe comment on that, but as far as the overall, lack of detail at this point in time is, as Washington University stated, they just don't have it at the moment as far as what will go where on that site. I do think that there will be some comfort within the community once everyone has a chance to see how these overlay districts are actually drafted, what those regulations look like, and how specific they are to what can actually occur on the property. Again, it's kind of an abstract concept to talk about an overlay district and how we'll regulate these things. But I think once everybody has a chance to see it, to review it, and our intention is to think about everything that could potentially cause a nuisance at the outset and build that into those regulations. So I do feel that once you see it, you'll be a little more comfortable with that. But as far as the lack of detail at this point, I think that's just the nature of this particular project. But this is the whole reason we're trying to have this conversation in advance, is to learn as much as we can about potential concerns, again, so we can try to mitigate those things as we move forward. So we
And
do
I
appreciate that.
appreciate that. And I would very much like to know that Clayton will be thinking first of the property owners who pay the real estate taxes to support the schools and our homes and our values, and the fact that the folks that live in this particular part of Clayton tend to stay for a very long time and have deep roots. They may not be the richest of Clayton roots, but it's made for a very lovely community for a lot of very rich cultural activities in the community. And I hope that you will take into consideration the impact of this kind of planning without a plan makes on all of us.
No, I think we understand those points, and our residents are our top concerns. So that's why we're going through this process right now, rather than just putting a really detailed overlay out there for everybody to comment on as it's going through some formal approval process and hit the community cold with it. We really want to build this dialogue and get everybody's input at the outset and work with the residents, work with the institutions to build the best possible plan we can for the next 40, 50, 80 years on this property.
Well, we should go for 100 years, because I have 100-year-old houses.
Here we go. Let's do it.
100-year-old houses in a national register historic district, which is only one small step from a national landmark community. And those who may not be aware of that, that is a fact that the DeMun community is only one step, and probably because I was too lazy to fight the fight, to make it on the same level as the Arch.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, we are at time. We're at 8:15 now. We will take one more question or comment if we've got it. Otherwise, that will do it for the evening. We may have one more in the room. Yes, please.
I just want to revisit my last question. Why did Concordia go to Washington U and ask them if they want? Did you benefit from this? Do you benefit? How did you benefit?
Absolutely. We've entered into an agreement where A, we're compensated for the use
Okay.
of this land, and B, our students will have access to much higher quality facilities than they do today.
Okay, because when you said that they had the deed, I thought that meant they owned it. But do they own it, or are you renting it to them? Like you're the landlord?
Well, as Mary said, it's a very complex legal transaction. The property will be deeded to them for a period of 80 years.
Which means
that they are the titled owner for 80 years, and at the end of the 80 years, that deed reverts to Concordia Seminary.
So you don't get any money, what do you,
You just got a lot of money at the beginning.
how much?
That's all confidential.
Okay, so you
Wow.
Concordia didn't just give them a deed to it. Well, good. I mean, I would hope that you would.
You can be our negotiator for, if we do anything.
The city would like some land too. Love to build another park. All right, well, I don't see any other hands up, and I think everyone in the room has had a chance to speak this evening. So I want to thank everyone for participating and invite you all again to check out our website that has all of this information. Sign up for those notifications. There's much more to come on all of this, and I appreciate it very much. So thank you all.